All right, good afternoon. I appreciate everybody coming here. The cameras, the lights, all of these faces, I've been this nervous since my wife gave birth on November 1st. That turned out pretty well, so hopefully this will turn out equally as well. Before we get started, I do want to recognize a number of people who are here today from the Governor's Cabinet, Secretary McMahon from the Department of Labor, Secretary Bullock from the Department of State. We also have with us Kevin Whitaker, Ed Capodanno with ABC, Jim Lardier with AAA, Scott Rathfon with ACEC, Ted Williams, who is up here with our Council on Transportation, Nello Paoli, Mike Ryman, Sam Latham with the AFL-CIO, John Casey with Delaware Contractors Association, Greg Moore, Ciro Papadi, Howard Fortunato, Rich Heffron with the State Chamber of Commerce, Joe Shura, Bruce Jones, Mike Angelo with McCormick Taylor. So we want to thank all of you for coming here today and taking time out of your busy schedule on a pretty snowy day. I'm going to introduce the governor here, and I will tell you that when I became Secretary of Transportation, the governor told me that he had a lot of big ideas and big plans, but first we had to fix some things with DelDOT. Well, we fixed those things with DelDOT, and now I'm excited here today to introduce the governor who's going to take us through this. Governor.
Thank you. Good morning, everybody. For the legislators, I just want you to know I asked specifically for the chance to introduce you in case you were wondering why the secretary didn't introduce you. I said they're the best and I want to introduce them. So without any order, I see Representative Brady and Representative Pardee, and I see Representative Quinn Johnson and Representative Bill Carson, and I see Senator Peterson and Representative Ramon and Senator Venables and Representative Jakes. Senator Townsend. I think that's all of the legislators. So we do appreciate all of you coming, and to the rest of you to hear our plans as well. I know there's been a great deal of interest in this announcement today. What I mentioned in the State of the State last week in terms of our plan to invest an additional $500 million in our transportation infrastructure. The theme of my State of the State last week was around unleashing the potential of every Delawarean, and we believe that these infrastructure investments do just that, whether it's the ability to move goods and services, which obviously is incredibly essential to every industry in the state, and in addition, the fact that these investments will create good jobs in the meantime and lay the foundation for future prosperity, very important as well. As I mentioned, as I said pretty explicitly in the State of the State last week, I think it's time to stop complaining about the sorry shape of our Transportation Trust Fund and fix the underlying issue. And that's what our proposal is to do today. It's $1.1 billion over 5 years. It's a $500 million increase over our current plan. And I'm going to walk through just a couple of slides, and then I'm going to turn it over to Secretary Batt to walk through most of the presentation. First, in terms of why this is important and good for the state from a public safety standpoint, let me put it this way. Our overriding principles are around public safety, economic development, and fiscal responsibility. We are achieving all of those things with our plan today. Public safety in terms of what it takes to maintain a safe transportation network and alleviate congestion. Economic development, not only the jobs that we create with respect to these specific projects, but very importantly, how upgraded infrastructure is important to keeping jobs here and attracting jobs in the future. And fiscal responsibility, extraordinarily important. We spend a lot of time on this plan to make sure we're doing it in a fiscally responsible way, looking to the long-term financial viability of the Transportation Trust Fund, including the healthy credit rating as designated by Moody's and Standard & Poor's. So in 2010, the General Assembly passed House Bill 500. It established a bipartisan task force to comprehensively review transportation demands and funds, short-term and long-term, available and required to meet the state's needs. 24 people from the General Assembly, various state agencies, and other stakeholders from the public and private sector, including some of the people in this room, served on this task force, and we know you put a lot of time into it. In March of 2011, they delivered a report that said the Transportation Trust Fund has experienced insufficient revenues over a significant period managed only by the delay of necessary capital projects in order to size the budget to meet available revenues. And to those of you who served on that task force, you probably will remember that conclusion. The report said that current revenue streams would not support 30% of the needs that would occur between 2012 and 2013, and the result of that imbalance, if not corrected, would be to eliminate all new capital projects by 2017 or severely reduce the department's core program, resulting in an accelerated deterioration of our transportation infrastructure. The task force said it was concerned, rightly so, about the negative impact such deterioration would have on our economic competitiveness and on our ability to create jobs. So the reality is, and the task force said this, that our trust fund has been financially challenged for many years by a combination of stagnant or flat revenue streams, residual debt, rising operating and construction costs, increased transit expenses, ongoing maintenance requirements, and steadily rising demands for new projects, all of this to keep pace with economic expansion and traffic growth. And although Shailen's going to get into this in a few minutes in a little more detail, there is no industry that could possibly be successful if you have expenses that grow with inflation and you have revenues that don't. But that is the story of our Transportation Trust Fund. And he's going to get into that in more detail, but I think it's a very important takeaway for all of you to remember. So these challenges I just outlined have caused a postponement or delay of more than 55 road projects in the current fiscal year, and deferral of projects leads to higher future costs in system maintenance, construction costs, and right-of-way acquisition. He was telling me earlier, I don't think I'm stealing his thunder, that the difference in cost, if you've got potholes and the like, if you fix it quickly versus if you wait for a major reconstruction, it's 5 times as expensive to do the major reconstruction than if you get to it quickly. It just doesn't make any sense. DelDOT has made considerable effort over the last 2 years to reduce operational costs and increase efficiency. The agency, under Secretary Batt's leadership, has reduced consultant costs and overtime, limited cell phone usage, renegotiated contracts, eliminated vacant positions, improved technology, reduced waste, lots of things. And he's going to get into a little bit of this today. But it's not enough. The bottom line is that the Transportation Trust Fund lacks a reliable revenue source. And we are here today to propose a fix for that. And so with that, I'm going to turn it back over to Secretary Batt, and then I'm going to come back up at the end as we take some questions.
Thank you, sir.
By the way, I know that some of the legislators have committee hearings and the like to get to, so I do appreciate your being here for as long as you can, but we'll look forward to the opportunity to catch up with you.
So this is the 2011 Transportation Trust Fund Task Force report, and this was handed me when I became secretary. It's dated March of 2011. And when I read through it, I want to echo what some of the governor's statements. You know, we've been delaying projects because we've had uncertainty in the funding for the Transportation Trust Fund. Another conclusion of the report, and before I get into that, I do want to thank some of the people who are here today that served on that task force. I know that Senator Peterson served on that task force, Senator Venables, Representative Carson, Paul Morrill, Ted Williams, John Casey was on there, I think the mayor of Dover. So it was a bipartisan, broad-based group that came together. And it said essentially the goal in correcting the structural problem of funding the TTF is to create a sustainable stream of revenue which supports an appropriately sized capital program. Because we deal in multi-year projects, it's a 6-year capital plan that we submit every year, and then you can't be having uncertainty around that funding. So there were a number of conclusions that were called for in the report. One was to realign the capital transportation program based on need versus want. And so one of the ways we've identified to solve that problem is we've introduced a prioritization process that now scores all of our projects based on their contributions to safety, congestion mitigation, environmental impact, multimodalism. So instead of making subjective decisions about projects that we build, we are making data-driven decisions about those projects. That's an important point because it gets to some of the issues that DelDOT dealt with in the past. Another issue that we dealt with was, or another finding in the report was needed to control borrowing and reduce the department's overall debt. You know, when I became secretary in 2011, DelDOT owed $1.2 billion as an agency. That is a big number for an agency our size, and almost 30 cents of every dollar that we were bringing in revenue was going to pay our debt service. So if I brought in $1 of revenue, 30 cents would go to pay my debt service. That was an unsustainable rate. It was considered in the report, and we're going to show you later, we've reduced our debt by about 30%, and more importantly, that has freed up about $25 million a year that is now going to projects that was going to our debt service. Right-sized transit. We're in the process of doing that. That was a finding of the Transportation Trust Fund Task Force report. You know, we've dealt with the fact, or we're dealing with the fact that our paratransit costs have gone up 233% since the year 2000. We were paying $8 million. Now it's closer to $50 million. So we've implemented a plan with working with the governor and members of the General Assembly to try to fairly address that issue. So these were some of the things that were called for. The last one that was that I put up there was to increase existing revenue. That is one of the solutions that was proposed that we have not dealt with. And I think that that is what the governor is saying it is now time to address. Now, one of the reasons that resources have not kept up with demand is because our system continues to grow. Many people think of Delaware as a small state, but DelDOT owns almost all of the roads. So we're responsible for almost 14,000 lane miles. That's a lot of roadway. And that has increased by about 10% since 2000. But while the lane miles have been increasing, the number of signals, the number of trucks that we have to have on those roads to keep them clean when it snows, our main driver of our revenues, which is the motor fuel tax, has not kept pace. In fact, $1 of purchasing power from 1995, the last time the gas tax was raised, is worth 65 cents today. And there's no business out there that would operate under 2014 costs, but keep their revenues pegged at 1995 levels. It's only when you get into our neck of the woods that that becomes that much of a challenge. And the problem only gets worse. Many of you are driving more fuel-efficient cars today than you were in 1995. There are many more fuel-efficient cars that will be on the road as we go forward. That is why this is now the time to address this issue. And as I said, the last Delaware motor fuel tax increase was in January of '95. And this graph just illustrates the blue line is inflation since 1995, and the red line represents the motor fuel tax revenues. And you can see starting in 2005, that those lines diverge. And if we were to continue that graph on into the future, the problem only gets bigger as we go forward. So the governor talked about investing $500 million into our capital transportation program, because if we don't do anything, this is the reality that we face with. So as you can see, in 2008 and 2009, we were delivering transportation programs on the state side north of $200 million a year. These are projects that create jobs, that create other economic development. Then the agency ran into a bit of a rough patch. But now we've bounced back over the last couple of years. Even though we've been taking these steps to reduce our debt, we've been delivering projects at the rate of about $190 million a year for the next few years. However, that is in the face of having to delay projects. We delayed $46 million worth of projects last year because we have these funding uncertainties. And so you can see, though, that was what we've done. However, unless we do something to deal with our revenue issue, we're looking at capital programs of $128 to $137 million over the next 5 years. So those are just numbers. What does that mean? If I have a $128 million capital program next year, that means we essentially have to go into our capital transportation program and evaluate every project in terms of how long can we push that project out. And so there are a number of safety projects that get pushed out. There are bridge projects. Today we were talking earlier today, people were talking about when are we going to get that bridge over the Christiana River. That project is scheduled to go right now in our current plan. However, under this new reality, that project gets delayed. The widening of SR1 from Tybout's Corner to SR 273. Many people have talked to me, and we really appreciate the work. They really appreciate the work of DelDOT to improve the interchanges of around 95 and 1. The next phase of that is to widen that section of 1 from 4 lanes to 6 lanes. That is a necessary project both from a safety perspective and to reduce congestion around that area. That project doesn't go. We've got delayed Newark train station where we've got a $10 million Tiger grant from the feds that is associated with us matching state funds. That project gets delayed, which could put at risk that Tiger grant. A reduced paving program. We're hearing complaints about potholes. Delayed division of motor vehicle technology enhancements. There's just a lot of things in 15 that happened that are pretty negative. But then it continues because these cascade throughout the rest of our 6-year plan. So in addition to those issues in 15, I've now got a bunch of projects that not only get delayed, they get delayed throughout the life. And I won't go through all of them, but over my shoulder here, well, it was over my shoulder here, over there is a project of one of our interchanges on Route 1. we are working right now to remove a lot of our putting grade separations on Route 1 to help alleviate some of the traffic congestion issues. People talk about some of the traffic lights causing backups. We're trying to remove those. Well, there's a couple of here, of these grade separations, Little Heaven, and that are up there that we can't advance as quickly unless we have this funding. And the last one I'll point out is this Park Avenue realignment. The Sussex County Airport received federal funding for a 500-foot runway extension. They've actually got federal money available to do 1,000-foot, which would allow them to bring in a larger grade of aircraft, I think 737s, which is tied to Pat's aircrafts down there, providing more jobs. But we can't extend that runway 1,000 feet until we realign Park Avenue because you have to move the road. That's a project that gets delayed. So not only are you losing the construction jobs on that road itself, but it starts to impact other jobs around there. Reduced paving program, and I know the legislators will agree that CTF is a challenge for them as well. So I won't dwell too much on this, but if you don't invest the money, the governor mentioned the fact that it costs 5 times more if you have to reconstruct instead of preserve. Increased congestion, DMV wait times increase, and most importantly, we're delaying a lot of safety projects. So that is the challenge, and from the challenge you provide an opportunity, and that's where the governor has given us the go-ahead for a $500 million increase over that level over the next 5 years to maintain a safe and reliable transportation system, put thousands of people back to work. The Federal Highway Administration, where I worked before, estimates that for every $1 billion of investment that you make in transportation, you get about 13,000 jobs in direct and indirect jobs associated with that. So you can see that if we're putting $500 million in over the next 5 years, there are literally thousands of jobs that are associated with that. Fix the shortfalls in revenue that were called for in this report, give the department a sustainable source of funding, and maintain their long-term financial viability. So the proposal would be increase of revenue of $50 million that is paid for via a 10-cent increase in the gas tax. This is a step that many states have taken, and I'll show later how Delaware compares to other surrounding states. We are currently one of the lowest in the region. We will continue to be amongst the lowest gas taxes in the region, but we're taking a step that many other states have taken. And in addition to that, we would match that $50 million in borrowing, in gas tax revenue with $50 million in borrowing. A balanced approach that gets to the heart of doing it in a financially sustainable manner. Earlier, I talked about the fact that we've been able to drive down our debt. And there are some people out there who have called for the fact, well, DelDOT should just go out and borrow all of the money. Let's not make the tough decision. Let's just borrow all of the money. Well, as you can see, we talked about the fact that we've reduced our debt. We've reduced our debt service to revenue ratio. So as you can see from this chart, the blue line and the peak represents our peak indebtedness at $1.2 billion in 2011. The solid black line represents $1 billion in debt. Under our current no-borrow strategy, which was the blue line, you see we've been able to aggressively reduce our debt by about 30%. However, the green line represents if we just go out and borrow $100 million a year, you can quickly see that within a few years we get back to that unsustainable level of overall debt. And the other thing to keep in mind is it's not just, however, the red line represents the governor's plan, which is a mix of borrowing and a mix of new revenue, which allows you to continue to drive that debt down. This is debt service as a percentage of our revenues. Under the blue line, you can see it peaked above 30% in 2011, where almost 30 cents of, or over 30 cents of every dollar of our revenue is going to pay our debt service. You can see on the green line, if we just borrow, we get back to that unsustainable level very quickly. However, under the red plan, which is the governor's balanced approach, we begin to approach that black line, and if we continue that out, we'd get to that black line in a few years, which is 20%, which is kind of the nationally accepted standard of if you're running a business, if you're running a transportation agency, where you should be in terms of debt service to revenue. And so as you can see before, this is the same shot as before. The red represents where we are without the revenue. The green line represents where we can be if we take these steps. And as you can see, we're back to the level of FY08, FY09. We're putting people back to work. We're delivering these projects. And so if we get that revenue, we're able to start construction on many of those grade separations. There's a lot of safety projects that go. We've got a full list. I'm not going to go through it here, but we've got the list because we have a data-driven system now that shows the projects that can go and that don't go. We can show you those lists. Advanced multimodal projects, so the Newark station goes. The governor has called for a downtown revitalization. One of the things we're looking at is a new Wilmington transit hub. There's funding for at that new level. New priority paving program for suburban streets. We've talked with the bond bill chairs about the fact that a lot of legislators talk about the fact they don't have enough money. We would use a data-driven approach to take the worst roads and put some of the money towards funding those streets. Municipal street aids has increased. Funding for major bridge projects, increased funding for pedestrian, ADA, and First Aid trails and pathways. There's a lot of positives here. And so then the question becomes, what is the impact to the average Delawarean? You say gas tax, I say gas tax, and people get concerned. We've calculated that if the average Delawarean is driving about 14,000 miles per year in a car that gets 23.5 miles per gallon, that means about 573 gallons of gas in a year. At 10 cents, that's $57 more a year. $4.78 a month. I know, I fill up my car about 3 times a month. I put in 15 gallons of gas, so it'd be about $4.50 a month for me. And so we understand that $4.50 a month is real money to people, but it's also real money that is needed for infrastructure investments. And people pay that much for cell phones and things like that. It's the same sort of level. Transportation is a utility that needs to be funded. And then the question becomes, okay, well, how do we rank compared to many of our states in our region? You can see the green line represents Pennsylvania. They increased their gas tax last year significantly. They're going to be at almost 61 cents a gallon. I believe that's by 2018. New York was already at almost 50 cents. Connecticut, 49.3. Maryland also raised their gas tax. They're up to 43.5 cents by 2016. We were at 23 cents. We'll be at 33 cents. The state that is an outlier there is New Jersey. We will not make any comments about transportation in New Jersey today. However, I will say that the one thing I will say about that is that New Jersey, like many states, is facing challenges based on the fact that they are clearly at the point where they are only able to pay their debt service at that level. They're going to have to address this as well. So as you can see, Delaware, even though we're increasing it in a moderate way, we're still in a good place. And it's not just our region. Virginia last year increased funding for transportation. I believe it's Idaho or Wyoming, a pretty red state, introduced a 10-cent gas tax and passed it last year. So it's not a Republican or Democrat issue. It's about making the necessary investments. And so with that, I will call up Paul Morrell from the Committee of 100 to come up here. And he was also served on the Transportation Trust Fund Task Force report. And as he comes up here, I just want to point out that we put a picture of Amazon up there because Amazon went to Middletown because many of the infrastructure improvements that were needed for that facility were already there. And so that just goes to show you that these infrastructure investments not only create jobs when you build the projects, they lead to jobs elsewhere. But Paul, come on up. Thank you.
Thank you. My name is Paul Morrell. I'm with the Committee of 100. We're an association of businesses that works on economic development issues. I'd like to, first of all, thank the Governor and Secretary Bott for their leadership on this issue, both to the Governor for impaneling the task force back in 2011, but now coming forward with this proposal. Secretary Bott has laid out the case, I think, for the need for improving the conditions in the trust fund. It was just obvious to the task force when we were meeting as we learned all the challenges facing the trust fund that we were going to have to do something about it. And I think that task force report has stood the test of time, and so I'm glad to see that we're moving toward implementing it. But so I won't repeat any of all those kind of details. Let me just talk about two things. First, the seriousness of the problem that we're facing on a macro level and the response that we've had so far. First of all, I was talk about that other states in the region have all adopted massive infrastructure improvement programs. Virginia, Maryland, New Jersey did other infrastructure improvements in Pennsylvania, and 3 of those states have Republican governors. So it's not a partisan issue. It's a competition issue, however. As the governor often points out, we're in a global competition, a global economy, and without a world-class infrastructure, we're simply not going to be competitive. And that's what our surrounding states have all recognized, and we need to make this investment. And that judgment is not mine alone. At the top of the presentation, Secretary read off a list of names of folks that are here scattered throughout, my colleagues in the business community that are out in the audience. We've been working, and along with elements of organized labor, have been working as a close-knit team now for over a year to bring this issue forward and get it addressed in a public fashion. So it's unprecedented, I think, the level of cooperation between the broad-based business community and labor around a single issue. Now, we may go over to Leg Hall this afternoon and fight about our minimum wage and other issues, but we came together firmly on the need for improving our infrastructure in Delaware. And so I, again, thank the governor for bringing this forward. Thank you.
Thanks, Paul. This time I'd like to call up Ted Williams, who is a member of the Council on Transportation and also served on the task force.
Thank you, Secretary Governor Markell. As Shaylin said, I was the chairman of the task force in 2011, and it was a very huge eye-awakening for us that have served on the task force to determine where we were in our transportation trust fund. As many of you know, there's been studies done over the years that have indicated that our citizens believe that we need to have a very adequate transportation system, not only for economic development, but for their daily lives. And I believe today, with what Secretary Batt has done over the last 3 years in reducing debt and also now addressing the transit needs, we are now at the point where we need to address the revenue needs. This is a very minimal impact on the average household in Delaware, as the Secretary indicated, of about $4.50 a month. But it's going to be a major impact on the economic driver of the state of Delaware. Also, it's going to be able to bring projects forward, especially those safety projects that are very instrumental in keeping our citizens safe and allow our citizens to move throughout the state. And it will also allow us to attract new businesses to Delaware and also keep the businesses in Delaware that are currently here. We're always hearing stories about people wanting to leave or wanting to come into Delaware, but we need to address all of those. Keep them here, but also be able to attract business, and this will allow us to do that. And I thank the governor.
Thanks. And with that, I'd also like to call up Sam Lathan, head of the AFL-CIO.
Thank you very much. Just let me say, if my counterpart from the building trades could be here, he would. And I just want to take this moment. Harry Gavell, and it's like family in this state. We all know each other and we all work with each other. And Harry's not here because he had a stroke. And so we just make sure we keep him in our prayers. There's a saying that freedom isn't free. And I think we all saw that last night in the State of the Union with a young man that gave so much. And I don't know about you, but it almost brought me to tears of how much he's given to this country. And so with that being said, we knew that this wouldn't be free. We pounded and beat and hammered on the governor to create jobs. Didn't tell him how to do it. We need jobs. And I can stand here and say I think he's come up with the best way to do that, in that the borrowing and the revenue part of it. And so we knew it would cost. And I think we all we're at the place where we were ready to take that on. I think the issue now is just hope that our legislators have the political will to do this. We need jobs. We need to create jobs in this state. We need to put Delawareans to work. They're hurting, especially in the construction industry. We got to make sure we bring that back. And so we stand united, and we stand supporting the governor and the administration in trying to create jobs and put working men and women back to work. And hopefully this will achieve that. My understanding is we're ready to go. Once it happens, we have projects that are ready to go. And hopefully on the business end of it, if we put people to work and put more disposable income in their pocket, then they'll use that disposable income to help generate other businesses. Let me take a moment and thank, is Brian here, McGlinchey here? Brian and Rich Heffron from Deeds did an excellent job in putting us all together and working through a lot of this, and we're very supportive in trying to bring this to fruition. So again, Governor, thank you. Now we have a roadmap. Now we have something to work with. Let's get our tails ready and let's go to work.
Well, I want to thank Paul and Ted and Sam for being here, all of you as well. I think Secretary O'Mara has a rival in terms of which cabinet secretary speaks the fastest. I hadn't really seen that quite like that before, but I hope that you all could keep up with Shailen, because I think the argument is a very strong one for all of these reasons in terms of public safety, economic development, as well as coming up with a plan that is viable and fiscally sustainable. Before I take any questions, I do want to ask if any of the legislators want to say anything. Okay, just want to give you that opportunity. But look, I mean, we should get this done. We should absolutely get this done. And this is not, I think, as a couple of the speakers mentioned, this is not a partisan thing. As I think Paul mentioned, Governor Corbett in Pennsylvania, Governor McDonnell in Virginia, as well as Governor O'Malley in Maryland, they've done it, working with people of both parties. There is nothing about infrastructure that's partisan one way or the other. And the idea that we could expect, again, I'm going to come back to the point I made at the beginning, that private industry, a not-for-profit, a state government could be successful when our costs go up, but our revenues stay flat, it doesn't happen. It's not a single business anywhere. And so nobody particularly wants to do this, but we have to do it. This is why we're here. And so we really appreciate all of you being here to learn about our proposal, to support the proposal. And we look forward to getting it done. But with that, I'll be happy to take any questions that anybody may have. Yes?
What's the next step to getting this proposal to become a reality?
Well, the next step is to meet with members of the General Assembly. I'm sure that they'll have lots of questions and perspectives on this. And as with everything else, we have to get the necessary votes from them. And we have great respect, for every single member of the Senate, every single member of the House, regardless of party. We're going to be speaking to every one of them. But in the end, in a democracy, the way it works, the president last night talked about doing lots of things by executive order. We do some things by executive order. But the way our system has been set up, and I think it's a good system, is that the will of the people is reflected by the members of the General Assembly. And so we're going to spend a lot of time talking with them. And of course, we expect a lot of you who are in the room who have an interest in this, one way or the other, will also be speaking to members of the General Assembly. But they are an equally important branch of government, and so we expect to spend a lot of time talking to them about our proposal. Who else? Yep, Joe.
Governor, I would hope that maybe we could expand on it a little bit if we could look at the Route 1 corridor and the gas and also the communication down to Kent County. If somehow that can be looked at also, because it's key for, I think, the expansion of the state regarding business. I know.
Are you talking about the gas line?
Gas and communication.
Oh, okay.
Like
All right.
lacking in both.
You mean the natural gas? Okay. So Joe's bringing up something that goes beyond just the transportation trust fund and sort of additional infrastructure investment. There's no question additional broadband infrastructure pays off. We've already seen up in Wilmington with IPR in the 1201 Market Street building growing because of an investment that the Infrastructure Committee actually made a couple of years ago. We've been working on a natural gas extension. We've not sort of really figured out all the financing yet, but working with some of the companies in the industry. But we will be proposing in a couple of weeks, as I mentioned in the State of the State last week, some additional investments around clean water. Very important. I think it's, as I said last week, I think it's embarrassing that virtually every waterway in the state is impaired. Can't fish, can't swim. And I think we have a fundamental responsibility to leave the next generation cleaner water. And so it doesn't come easy or cheap, and we're going to be laying out some specific proposals. So I think, my guess is many of us are aligned on the need for additional infrastructure spending, but to make sure that we're communicating this in a way that people can really get their arms around. In this General Assembly, there are two primary initiatives that we're pursuing. One is around the Transportation Trust Fund. One is around water. It's not to say that other ones aren't important. We'll continue to sort of see what we can do. Who else? Yep.
Will the gas tax be indexed to inflation?
Something that we're looking at, something that we will, want to have those conversations with members of the General Assembly as well.
Well, it's done in Pennsylvania.
Yeah, the indexing was done in Pennsylvania and Maryland. Anybody else? Yep.
Not a
Scott.
question, more of a comment. Scott Rathbone with ACEC Delaware, president of ACEC Delaware. We represent 26 engineering firms in Delaware, over 600 members in those firms. And I just want to thank the governor and the secretary for moving forward and say it's about time. But I can understand with your slideshow and working with you over the years that there was some trust issues, some department, some Delaware issues that had to be addressed. And you've done an excellent job of addressing those. And like I say, it's about time. We need jobs. We need to be able to hire graduates from the University of Delaware, from different universities in Delaware, to work in the engineering field. Right now, there's other states, and with other states passing this tax, in investing in infrastructure, we're going to fall further behind if we don't do something.
If I could just expand on that a little bit, and I didn't really talk about this, and Shaylin sort of alluded to it, but in the it's about time mode. When Secretary Batts started, be 3 years in July, I told him, and I was pretty public about it at the time, that I thought his job number one was to really work with the many fine men and women of DelDOT to really rebuild the integrity of the agency. Because as you know, there had been some issues. I mean, there was plenty of reporting about this. Some of the issues at my own office, my chief of staff at the time issued a report about some of the challenges within the agency. And we really did believe that it was important to make sure that we did as much as we possibly could to rebuild that trust before we were in a position to ask for this. That doesn't mean, the rebuilding of DelDOT and frankly of every agency. We have an obligation every single day to the taxpayers and to the citizens of Delaware to be getting better and better. And we will continue to focus on that. But we're at a point now, I think, and if we didn't spend a whole lot of time looking backwards. But if you look at some of the recommendations in that Transportation Trust Fund report, we're tackling them. There's no question that we tackled the debt in a very significant way in terms of prioritizing needs versus wants. That, by the way, is not always very popular, but we've really tried to adopt a data-driven approach in terms of figuring out some of these projects. Right-sizing transit, some really difficult but important issues there. So we've been tackling these. But we don't believe, and I know it's an election year, and people particularly, are hesitant in election years to focus on these kinds of initiatives. We just, you look at that number and you see where we're going to be if this doesn't get done, and you're looking at a $128 million capital plan. That would be really unfortunate. And the people of the state, whether it's the workers who can work on these projects, or whether it's the citizens, or whether it's the businesses and the next Amazon, whoever it is, they don't really care that it's an election year. They want to be working now. They want us to be making the improvements now so that next year it takes less time to get their goods to market. They don't take that break. And they don't expect us to take the break.
Thank you.
Representative Brady.
And I noticed that the Secretary highlighted the transportation route. I'm going to ask about more passive use or in some cases recreational uses, but I noticed that you highlighted the train stations in Newark and Claymont and hopefully Wilmington, but some rail system that would be north and south, obviously from the resorts to metropolitan areas, and the more passive uses like bike and hike or alternate transportation sources or resources.
Yeah, so we're actually expanding our fixed route on transit. For example, we're not just a highway agency; we're a multimodal agency. So I believe next Sunday we're going to start Sunday service on Route 40 in Newcastle County, which has never been done before. And there are people who need that bus who are going to be on it, and we're able to do that because we found efficiencies elsewhere to drive that home. You mentioned downstate rail. That's a pretty people feel pretty passionately about downstate rail. It's something we'd love to do. But in terms of making data-driven decisions right now, we had a study that was done that it was about $200 million to upgrade the existing rail to provide limited service. and at that price point, it's not really something that's economically feasible. But we're making strides with the First State Trails and Pathways. We're looking at different ways that we can move people around the state, not just getting in a car.
Anybody else? And I think, Gerald, the other thing I would add with respect to the downstate rail, I think unless, as the president announced a few years ago, a big infusion into rail, I think it's just really difficult in a state where we just don't have the population to support it to see how that pays off. We would all love to do it, but it is hard in the meantime to see how that would pay off. Anybody else? Any other media? You guys are being very quiet. I'm assuming you want to talk to me separately. All right. Well, look, I very much appreciate the turnout. Again, to Paul, Ted, and Sam, thank you, and to the rest of you who have an interest in this. We would love to talk to you. And actually, we wanted to get a picture.
If we could just get, because we want to show the broad-based support for this. So at least each of them up here. If anybody else wants to come on up and jump in, you're more than welcome. So let's just stand.